The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always honoured to rise in this House, but tonight I'm not honoured by what we are going to be talking about in terms of the question that I asked the other day of the Justice Minister and she refused to answer regarding the decision by the Justice Minister to send lawyers into Ontario Superior Court to try and overturn an award of compensation to a survivor of rape at the Spanish residential school. My proudest day in this House was the day when former Prime Minister Stephen Harper stood up and made that historic apology. Where I come from, there were people who cried for days after that apology because they couldn't believe that justice would ever be done by a government of Canada after what happened to them. And so they trusted that this process, and the process was the independent assessment process, that you could come and bring the abuse that was done to you and tell your story in a non-confrontational manner. But that's not what happened. These people came into the hearings, and the federal government, which was the defendant, also had the legal responsibility to provide the documents. At the case of St. Anne's Residential School, which was a house of horrors, they suppressed thousands and thousands of pages of police testimony. They lied about it. The ministers lied. They lied in hearings. They had cases thrown out. What kind of government could do that? In the case of the Spanish decision, Mr. Speaker, nobody argued the merits of the case that this child had been raped by a priest, but the boy couldn't remember when he was raped. And the IAP, agreeing with the Justice Department, had that case thrown out. And it was thrown out under 2 re-reviews under the independent assessment process. So it was brought to Justice Perel, who called this a perverse misapplication of justice. And what else would any person call that, Mr. Speaker? So to see the Justice Minister deciding to go in to challenge Justice Perel's ruling is shocking. But it speaks to a larger pattern that we need to have the Justice Minister explain. We have the case of a 7-year-old girl raped at St. Michael's Residential School. And the government argued that they weren't obligated to pay compensation because she was a day scholar student, even though Indian Affairs was paying for her at that school. We have the case of a child who had their arm broken and suffered paralysis, and they had the case thrown out saying, oh, under this administrative split, these were day scholars. We're not responsible for them, even though they were paying. In the case of St. Anne's Residential School, where they lied about the access that they had the documents, and they obtained the documents from Ontario Superior Court in 2003 because they said it was unfair for the defendant, that is Canada, to go into these hearings without knowing all the evidence. And they were ordered to share that evidence, and they didn't share that evidence. And so they had a case thrown out of a survivor who was raped by a serial pedophile, and this government sat on the evidence and went into the hearings and said there was no merit to his case. So I want to ask why the Justice Minister has refused to answer a single letter about this, why the Justice Minister is using the full force of Canadian law to fight these survivors and to continue this pattern of obstruction and denial of justice and making a mockery out of the promise that was made in this House and made by this Prime Minister when he said that he would stop fighting these victims and survivors in court.